Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today I'm going to be doing the childhood book tag. This tag was created by Fantastic Magical, and I was tagged by Andrew at You Could Be Reading More. So thank you, Andrew, for tagging me. These are all prompts about what kind of readers we were as children. So here we go. Number one, were you a big reader as a child? Yes. Number two, did your parents read to you, and if so, what? Yes, most definitely. Um, I remember them reading golden books to us. I also had a little library of miniature golden books, and it came in a little cardboard box that was meant to look like a bookshelf. It was sort of, it was cardboard, but it was supposed to look like it was a little wooden bookshelf, and it had 36 miniature golden books in it. Some were Disney series, some were about animals in the wild, and some of them were about anthropomorphized animals. But there were 36 books in the library, and I remember my mother reading those to me, and then eventually I read them all to myself. I belonged to a kids' book of the month club, and I remember my mother reading those books to us. I remember her, mostly my mother, reading classics to us: Tom Sawyer, A Christmas Carol. Um, we had a bunch. We had a bunch of classics. We had like little children's version of classics. So I remember her reading those. Um, but I guess those are the ones that I remember having read to me. What is your first bookish memory? I don't think it's my first bookish memory, but it's an early bookish memory. The first library book that I ever took out of the library, and it's actually the thumbnail for this video. It was Ezra Jack Keats' book, The Snowy Day, and that was the first book that I took out of the school library. So I think it was probably first grade. So that's not my first bookish memory, but it's an early bookish memory, and it's a very, very important one. Number four, be honest. Did you read books assigned to you in school? Absolutely, yes. Remember, I was a high school English teacher. I became a high school English teacher because I was deeply influenced by my own teachers. And I absolutely always read what I was assigned. Number five, where did you get your books as a child? I got many of my books from the library. My mother took me to the library every Saturday, and I would take out whatever the number was that we were allowed to take. I remember buying books at school from the Scholastic Books. They would send out those little newsletters, and you'd pick the books that you wanted and bring in your money, and then in a couple weeks you'd get your books. I remember that. Before that, I remember my mother going to like school book fairs and buying books for me. And then when I was a little bit older, when I could actually navigate on my own, there was a bookstore in town that I remember going to a lot, and I loved it. Number six, did you watch any television meant to inspire reading? I don't think so. I certainly watched television, and I watched the television that kids were watching in the 1960s, but I'm not thinking it was meant to inspire reading. Number seven, what sort of genres or storylines did you like? I liked adventure stories. I liked mysteries. Some of the series that I read, which I'm going to talk about in another question, they were definitely mystery series. I liked animal stories. Eventually, when I was a little bit older, I did like fantasy. I read The Hobbit for the first time when I was 10. I didn't get the whole trilogy until I was 13. That was given to me as a gift. But I definitely read The Hobbit on my own before I even knew about the Lord of the Rings, and I was 10 years old the summer that I read that. And I've talked about this in a bunch of videos because I've been I've been reading so much science fiction these last few years, and that was definitely not a genre that I was exposed to as a child. I don't remember ever reading any science fiction as a child, and I don't think that was something that was emphasized for girls. Number 8, your favorite children's or picture book. Definitely that first book that I took out of the library, Ezra Jack Keats' The Snowy Day. And it's a book that I have continued to buy for the little children in my life. Luckily that's a book that's still readily available, and it's one that I've purchased over and over again. Number 9, your favorite chapter or big kids book. I've talked about this in other videos. Certainly one of my early favorites was this abridged edition of Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. And I remember from the last time I showed this, a lot of people around my age wrote in my comments that they also had this edition. I remember when I got it. I remember the summer that I read it. And it was in the summer that I was 8 years old. And my mother, this was my mother's favorite book in childhood. And she wrote something about that in the inside cover of the book when she bought it for me that summer. I was 8 years old. Other chapter books that I remember loving when I was little, I remember The Phantom Toll Booth being a book that I really loved. My Side of the Mountain was another book that I really loved. And I had a copy of that again. I rebought that as an adult. But I sent it to Kevin at Kevin Toll Reads because it was his favorite childhood book. Okay. And number 10, your favorite children's series. I had several, and they're all related. Probably the first series that I loved as a little kid were the Bobbsey twins, and that was a family of 4 children, and there were 2 older twins who were 12, Bert and Nan, and then there were little siblings, Freddie and Flossie, and they were 6, I think. And I still have about 15 of my Bobbsey twin books. I just brought a couple down. These are all inscribed by my mother also. Just brought a few of them down. And then from there, I went on to my brother's Hardy Boys books. And then a little bit later, Nancy Drew. This is not one from my childhood. This is one that I bought recently because I'm doing a little rereading of some Nancy Drew this summer. This is definitely not from my childhood. When I was little and I was getting these as gifts, they were $1.50 each, and now I'm seeing this Nancy Drew was almost $8. So this is definitely a much later edition, though it is probably an original cover. And I've talked about this in other videos. I thought that all of these books were written by the name on the cover, Carolyn Keene for Nancy Drew, and was it Franklin W. Dixon for the Hardy Boys, and Laura Lee Hope for the Bobbsey Twins. And then I found out somewhere in my childhood that they were not real people, and that all of these books were written by a corporation, the Stratemeyer Syndicate, and there were just a bunch of writers who were writing all of those books. So these are not real people, and it was devastating when I found that out. Another series that I liked when I was very young, and I just recently heard Greg talking about this series at Ghost Readers from the Sky, and this was the Encyclopedia Brown series, and I had actually downloaded a couple of these on my Kindle so I could reread Encyclopedia Brown, everyone's favorite boy detective, and he was just this really, really smart kid who would solve crimes or mysteries, all over the neighborhood. He would find missing things, and sometimes he helped his father solve cases. His father was a detective. He was just this really, really smart kid. And then at the back of the book, it would tell you how he figured it out, how he solved the mystery. And I loved those. So whenever they were available in my classroom, I read those. I don't think I owned any of those, but I remember taking them home from school. So those were my favorite series: the Bobbsey Twins, the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, and Encyclopedia Brown. And then tag others. So if you are watching this and you would like to reflect on your favorite books as a child, I hope you will consider yourself tagged. And then, as I always do, I'm going to tag some people in the notes below. This was really fun. It was good to take this little trip down memory lane. So as always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.